Senator, thank you so much for being here today. I know we had some technical difficulties on your end, and then we had technical difficulties on my end, but this is our new reality, right? So I just thank you so much for being here, and on quite the auspicious day. Today is the 100th anniversary of Votes for Women. That's why I'm wearing my handy dandy sash and my white to honor those women, and also to honor all of the women who did not get the right to vote until decades later because of, frankly, inherent racism and systemic racism. They were a part of the fight, but they did not see that dream fulfilled. And we know that there is still so much voter oppression that is happening today. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited and honored to be on with you because I really am so totally committed to your joining the General Assembly. We really need you there. And if I have no other message while I'm here, I'm just hoping that everyone is working hard for you and supporting you with 100% dedication. I look forward to actually visit you perhaps at some point in the campaign, as I did the last time that you ran. And, you know, your mention of women voting is really very apropos, not only this date, but this election. I think women hold the key to this next election, and it couldn't be at a more important time. I think we all agree, you know, what a absolutely riveting, awe-inspiring evening last night with Michelle Obama.
Absolutely.
Brought tears to my eyes, but you know, the history-making selection of Kamala Harris, my good friend in the United States Senate, as well as so much else happening in this country, shows how really women voters and women of all ages and all races are really changing our country. And our country really depends on it. As Michelle Obama said last night, our votes will determine the future of this country.
Well, and our lives truly depend on it. I really do believe that. And it's so fascinating in our district on the Democratic ticket. I will say it's pretty exciting that there are 5 candidates on the ticket. 4 of them are women. And I said in a post earlier today, I don't think that those iron-jawed angels, as they were called, those suffragettes, could have, I mean, they sort of did have the imagination of what it would look like someday, but even they might not have imagined that we would have a ticket where Joe Biden is at the top, but Kamala Harris is on it. Our fabulous Jahana Hayes is on it. The hopeful state senator Melissa Osborne is on it. And then there's little old me at the down ballot, so to speak. So it really is quite an auspicious day. But the concern is, of course, about interference in the election, and aside from the interference, what's happening with the United States Postal Service. And people were messaging me just before we were getting ready to record to say, did you see the news? The USPS is gonna roll things back. But what does that even mean at this point? We don't really have a lot of faith in what any of it means.
I'm gonna be very blunt. It means less than you may think it means. And the reason is severalfold. First of all, the Postmaster General has 0 credibility, in my view. He has conflicts of interest. He's proven to be untruthful. And his actions already in eliminating post office boxes, bolting some of them shut, decommissioning equipment, cutting hours and overtime, slashing staff, all of these actions, delays, downsizing, cutbacks, have already taken a toll. So when he talks about stopping the actions that he's already taken, I think we need to look beyond the words. In fact, what we really need right now is action, not words. And that's why I have urged that Mitch McConnell call us back to the Capitol.
Mm-hmm.
We should do our job. We should vote the $25 billion that's necessary for the mails to be on time, for voting by mail to be assured, and for confidence to be restored. So I think it's more than the Postmaster General's statements that are necessary here. In fact, I tend to disbelieve his sincerity, because after all, the president's agenda is no longer a hidden agenda.
Right.
He has put into words. He has articulated what we knew was in his heart, which is he wants to stop voting by mail. And he has said to the post office, you can have the money, but only if you abandon mail-in voting. So I think it's extremely dangerous, as you say. All of the efforts at suppressing the vote and directed, in fact, at minorities, communities of color, states where voters of color could make a real difference. All of the various different elements of voter suppression, I think, are deeply alarming.
It really is concerning, and it's I think of the suffragettes' words, deeds not words, and about the action that we all have to take. We are lucky in Connecticut. Our Secretary of the State, while we did have troubles with the presidential primary and mail delivery, I mean, we were already seeing it. I will tell you, just personally, I had 4 days where I received 0 mail, and that includes every catalog, postcard, just the junk mail that even on days that you don't receive real mail, you expect to receive. Literally, the box was empty. So, that's concerning that it's happening even here. But the Secretary of the State was so smart to put those ballot boxes basically at our town halls, because even though the Republicans were fighting them tooth and nail, at least we do have a safe way, especially if COVID comes back to Connecticut in a more significant way than it is now, to put those ballots in those boxes. I did it myself for the presidential primary. And I would encourage people to not, necessarily put it through the mail if they're concerned, but to go to those boxes if they don't feel safe going to the polls.
That's a very, very good point. Americans are going to vote. We want them to be safe when they vote. We want them to put those ballots in mailboxes or ballot boxes, not put relatives in hospitals. And I think that's one of the messages here. People can mail early and be assured that their absentee ballots or mail-in voting will reach the registrars on time. But, the suppression of the vote, the effort to create confusion, to sow distrust, is really pernicious because it undermines the willingness and determination of a lot of people who may not have voted in recent years to actually go to the polls, knowing how important this election is going to be. And I would just say that it's not only voting, but there are seniors waiting right now for their prescription drugs to be delivered. 80% of all veterans, 80% of all prescriptions going to veterans go by mail. Their veterans benefits, Social Security payments. You can go down the line. Small business supplies and equipment often go by mail. So this is a self-inflicted wound by the Postmaster General, who should be, in effect, delivering the mail and doing his job. And, the post office has a long and storied history. It began with Benjamin Franklin, and it's one of the few functions of the federal government that's actually specified in the Constitution. And here we are just throwing it away. And I think the hidden agenda here that the Trump administration has is to privatize, in other words, disband the public post office as we know it.
It's, as you said, there are people struggling to receive those things, but I would also say, people are really struggling after the pandemic. I see it all the time. I hear it from the voters that I talk to about, their businesses have not recovered yet, especially our small business owners, our restaurant owners. There are seniors who are deciding, even more seniors now deciding between food and medicine. My work at Food Share, as I was telling you before we started, we're still seeing 1,400 cars a day average at Rentschler Field. And we've already handed out over 3 million pounds of food just at that location. And that doesn't count our mobile sites that you've seen. So, the struggle that people find themselves in is real. And here, the Senate recessed, and we didn't pass any new legislation to help people. You must be frustrated.
I cannot tell you how frustrating and frightening it is that Mitch McConnell has been completely absent from negotiations. He hasn't come to any of the talks involving the Secretary of Treasury and the President's Chief of Staff. Pelosi and Schumer have been there. They've been trying to bridge the impasse. So far, they're still far apart. And we ought to be providing another stimulus payments so those folks in the food lines can
Mm-hmm.
have some way to pay their rent as well as put food on the table, clothe their children, and buy the medicines that they need. And likewise, aid to state and local governments, they're going to be laying off firefighters, police, first responders, and teachers. And the unemployment insurance that the president wants to slash by about a half from $600 to $300. We should be continuing at the present level, and of course, hazardous duty pay to the frontline workers.
Absolutely.
But postal workers, the docs, the nurses, all of these measures, including aid for those small businesses, you're absolutely right, the restaurants, the events industry, they have gotten through so far, but they are still hanging by a thread, and they will be going under, particularly minority-owned businesses. Thousands of them around the country have already folded. So we're saying to the president, lead, follow, or get out of the way.
Right.
Because we have a package approach.
It's painful. I will tell you, just this week, we lost a restaurant in Canton that was much beloved, Mikado, as you said, minority-owned business. And, you know, I had a restaurant owner and friend approach me at the polls on Tuesday for the presidential primary and say to me, did you see that statistic that 85% of restaurants will be out of business come December? Because, you know, with the reduced numbers of who can be inside, you know, the weather gets cold here pretty quickly. So they're either going to have to invest in heaters, which again costs money for their patios, or, you know, they're going to be up a creek and back to, you know, having to hope that the takeout business can tide them over. And it's really, really hard. And then on top of all of that, we had that, you know, legendary storm. And the response from Eversource was so miserable because they've cut the linemen. They weren't trimming the trees. We have an investigation coming up. Pura's having their hearing on Monday. And I can tell you, again, the local business owners, the amount of food that they had to throw out because it's expensive to have a backup generator and most of them don't have them. These guys are just taking hit after hit. And I know you've been frustrated with Eversource.
I have been, and all of the losses that you just described are the reason why I think that Eversource ought to be making refunds and reimbursing people for their losses, as well as the loss of power.
Right.
They ought to be reimbursing businesses that have lost business and perishable food, homes that have had the same kinds of property losses may not be insured. And, you know, instead what they're doing is talking about charging consumers for the cost of repairing and restoring power. So I think this whole system of regulation, which gives them a guaranteed rate of profit, a rate of return, without any link to performance. So the company is making 7 times what it did last year at this time. The top executive is making $40 million in a time of economic crisis and pandemic. And the CEO has been paid $20 million last year. There's something wrong with this picture. And I would just say that listening to you talk about it just emphasized to me how much we need your voice in the legislature. And that kind of strong, clear vision and courage is exactly what we need at this moment in our state's history.
I appreciate that. It really honestly comes down to exactly what Michelle Obama said last night for me. It is and always has been about empathy, because there is nothing that is happening to our neighbors that we shouldn't be concerned about in regard to, as I sit here, I'm sitting outside on our back porch and all around me, I can hear trees still being taken down or dealt with from the storm. And we're, you know, coming up on 2 weeks tomorrow. So the fact that we are still cleaning up from this, it's really unheard of when you consider that we had that 2011 storm. It's not like we didn't know with climate change and everything else that more storms like this would be coming our way. So it's just incredibly frustrating. I so applaud the work that you're doing. And I would also say, you know, what are your concerns around the security of the election from the Russia standpoint? Because we've talked about our internal issues, but we also have external sort of existential threats.
That's a great question. And I have been sounding the alarm over these past couple of weeks because I've been to classified briefings, secret documents. I've read them. The briefings and the documents are absolutely chilling. Unfortunately, I've been sworn to secrecy, so I can't talk about the specifics. The American people really deserve to know. They should be told. These documents should be unclassified. The briefing should be given to the American people. The facts should be known to them. The Russians know we know what they're doing. We know the Russians know that we know. The Russians know that we know that they know. The people in the dark are the American people. And all of this threat to our election from disinformation and propaganda is the same kind of threat that we see all around the world from Russia. And there was a report released just about 10 days ago by the State Department on the global threat to elections from the Russians. There's no reason to think the United States should be immune from the disinformation, the propaganda, the hacking into computers, the threats to the integrity of the election process that is going on by Russia globally, affecting other countries. And so there really is a threat of interference. But of course, and in fact, your question is very timely, the report issued today by the Senate Intelligence Committee, which, by the way, is bipartisan.
Right.
This committee is completely bipartisan, and the report's bipartisan, shows how clearly there was aid from the Russians during the 2016 election. And what I've said is that global report about what Russia is doing in other countries now makes those tactics look like child play. So much more sophisticated now than they make those past techniques and tactics look rudimentary, almost quaint. And so I think there really is a reason for alarm, and the American people deserve to know the truth.
Well, and I will tell you, even with our little election in 2018, that when I ran, we saw it. We saw that, you know, on Instagram and Twitter, the people following us or the people requesting to follow us on Instagram, or, you know, there were a lot of Russian names. There were a lot, you know, sometimes they don't even bother to hide it. That's the funniest part about it, is that it's not even something that they really go out of their way to hide. So I did see part of that, you know, information come across today, and I knew you had been talking about it already. But is there anything that we can do as citizens in terms of contacting people and insisting that they release more of this information?
I think that's a great idea. People ought to be outraged, just as they should be by the postal deliveries, and I've urged that they contact my Republican colleagues,
right?
Because Democrats are united in saying we need that $25 billion for the postal system. Likewise, on Russian interference, the report is bipartisan. The actual majority on the committee is Republican. So they've cooperated, Republicans and Democrats, members of the committee, and I think contacting more of our Republican friends is very important to raise awareness about the impending threat to the integrity of our election system. And on the HEROES Act, the aid for our economy, the aid for healthcare, for more testing, as well as funding vaccines, making sure they're going to be available to everyone. We're making progress, but there has to be continued testing and contact tracing. The way to stop this pandemic is to be responsible, to wear masks, to wash hands, to be physically distanced, but we also need to fund the testing that is necessary to tell people when they can be dangerous because they've been infected.
Well, and that's, you know, in terms of the pandemic, I'm glad that we kind of came back around to that because today is the 100th anniversary. I just want to talk about something that I know you've talked about, but that a lot of people may not be aware of, that unfortunately we are seeing in the United States, our domestic violence homicides go up. And we think there's a direct correlation to the pandemic. Several states reporting between a 76 and an 86% increase. Those are not Connecticut numbers. I want to make that clear. But we are seeing, you know, that incidence go up. Sadly, we've seen an incidence of reporting child abuse go down because children were not in school. And so, you know, I don't think that it needs to be a partisan issue in terms of getting us back on track, because we all want to get back on track. But I am, you know, I lost a friend to domestic violence in the last year and a half. and it's not, unfortunately, even the first friend. And so I was wondering if you could speak just a little bit about, you know, some of the things that you've been talking about regarding domestic violence.
Absolutely. And I've been working on this issue for some time, as I know you have been.
Yep.
It is so important to involve men, by the way. I started an organization in partnership with Interval House, the largest shelter in the state of Connecticut for domestic violence survivors. It's called Men Make a Difference, Men Against Domestic Violence. And we have seen over the last few months an increase in domestic abuse and violence. You know, there are various explanations for it. People are confined at home, the strains and stresses of being in close quarters. And, you know, the numbers of beds at the shelters have been reduced because they have to do more physically spacing. They have less room. And women are more afraid of leaving their homes because they'll expose themselves or their children to the virus. So it's kind of like a perfect storm for domestic violence. And just yesterday, we had a press event with Karen Jarmock, who's the head of the Connecticut Coalition Against Domestic Violence, and Ramona Mercado Espinoza, who is a leader in Hartford Legal Aid, talking about this increase in domestic violence and what can be done about it. And I'll tell you, number one on my list is passing the Violence Against Women Act. It's known as VAWA. You know, it has been since 1994, when it was first passed, a completely bipartisan bill.
Yes.
I have helped to lead the reauthorization of it as long as I've been in the Senate. And it has been bipartisan until now. The House passed it a year and a quarter ago. A year and a quarter, April of 2019. And still, Mitch McConnell will not allow a vote on it. Now, this act is more than just a high-sounding name. It also provides resources.
Absolutely.
About 100 that are necessary for shelters, for counseling, for other services for women, because you know, and I'm sure many of the folks listening do as well, how hard it is for someone to break away from an abusive relationship. You know, we kind of figure, oh, well, you know, someone is being beaten up or abused emotionally, and of course, she'll leave, right? Well, it is often very, very, very difficult. And I think that's the first thing for men to understand, how emotionally traumatic it can be to leave even a very abusive relationship because of all of the dynamic that occurs. And I'm no expert, so I'm not going to try to pretend that I understand it. But I just know we need these counseling and other services. We need the shelters, and passing VAWA is really a vitally important step. And there's other money that can be provided through the HEROES Act and so forth. But this funding is really absolutely critical.
Well, and I will tell you, because I know Karen Jarmock and I know the work that they do. And I have to say that Connecticut Safe Connect is such a wonderful program, because you're able to text or call or email or chat, you know, you're chatting, you can even chat live, and it is a real person, you know, who can help you get out of the situation that you're in. You know, unfortunately, we know that restraining orders often make the situation worse. And we know that the numbers are just extraordinary. We also know, and there's going to be a future Tuesday talk with some other friends who happen to live in Canton, but are experts on domestic violence, about the connection between excessive force complaints of police officers and their, unfortunately, they're correlating domestic violence themselves. We had a case in Connecticut a few weeks ago where we had officers who were taken off the force because, or I believe arrested because they were covering up a colleague's domestic violence. And that's just unacceptable. When you say we have to get men involved, you're absolutely right. And I think that there's such an economic factor to being able to leave, because there is so much coercive control when it comes to food and finance and everything. But I just want to point out that domestic violence is across all socioeconomic levels, because my friend should have had no problem leaving. But unfortunately, the trigger, at least we think the trigger for what ended in her death, was a custody battle and a custody hearing specifically. And that's the kind of thing that we have to do better. And the Violence Against Women Act is certainly a great first step towards being able to do that. And as long as there's breath in my body, I'll be supporting that and working for the women who, and men, frankly, there are men who are victims of domestic violence. We can't forget that.
Right.
But we have to work harder.
You know, one of the statistics, you're absolutely right, mostly women, but 5% of the victims are men. But the other statistic that really sticks with me, more than 70% of all of the perpetrators of domestic violence have seen or experienced it in their own lives as children.
Yes.
So it's a cycle.
Yep.
The men who commit domestic violence have seen it or experienced it as children. We need to break that cycle.
Yep.
Exactly.
I think that we will have to focus more on that trauma as well as we move forward, because, I have a friend who's been through a lot of things in her life, and she said, well, you're only as sick as your secrets. But when you're carrying that trauma around from your own childhood, unfortunately, it sometimes manifests itself in traumatizing others. So,
and another reason why we need your voice in the legislature, someone with this understanding who can bring that perspective, not only your work at food share and providing sustenance to people, but also, the emotional and intellectual grasp of these issues, which is so important to the legislature, particularly at this moment in our history, when I see, and you do too, so much hardship and heartbreak resulting from this pandemic. We talk about numbers so often, the numbers of deaths, the numbers of infections and hospitalizations. Behind those numbers, are human beings. And by the way, one of the really powerful parts of that convention last night, the first night of the convention, was to show the people who have been impacted by COVID-19 and this pandemic that has taken people from us, the losses in individuals, so dynamically presented. But I've seen it, a friend of mine whose children grew up playing with my children passed away in 5 days. This insidious, pernicious disease is really still very much with us. We haven't conquered it. And there's a danger that we'll see it come back in a second wave, even in Connecticut. So we need to be mindful and continue the precautions, but also reach out to people. Folks say we need to do hand washing and mask wearing and social distancing. I don't like social distancing. I like physical distancing. We need less social isolation, more coming together. And that's true, particularly, what I see in the facilities that cater to senior citizens, how isolated they can become. But all of us, talking again about domestic violence, very often the victims and survivors can feel very isolated.
Absolutely. And I think that has probably been the theme. And those are what I would call the untold numbers of the pandemic, are the people who are, suicides are up, isolation, anxiety, depression, so many things. And we already had a mental health crisis in this country. So now it's going to be moving forward. How are we going to get those services? I was so grateful that in the special session that telehealth was addressed, because there are people who truly need it. Early on, we were making phone calls as, sort of repurposed our volunteers from campaigning to just checking on our seniors. Because honestly, it's tough with those senior centers closed from a nutritional standpoint, from a social standpoint, from an activity standpoint, keeping seniors' minds active. I'm grateful my grandparents are still with us. I talk about them all the time, almost to the point of it being a joke now. But, it's thank God that my parents are well enough to be caring for my grandparents, and, but they're all in the same risk group, right? So, we're physically at risk, but it's also, emotionally and well-being is at risk. So I think the sooner that we can come up with solutions, because let's remember, so much of this was unnecessary. If we had just had a federal response to begin with, this is not where we would be right now. So I'll let you have the closing words on that. And
Well, the point that you just made is a critical one, preparedness, facing reality, listening to science, and respecting the powerful force of the epidemic, the pandemic, the virus that we can't stop without proper action, recognizing the reality, and calling it a hoax, saying it'll go away by a miracle or when the warm weather comes. You know, what I really feel is so criminal, and I use that word advisedly because I'm a former federal prosecutor, United States Attorney for Connecticut, and former Attorney General for the state. But the President of the United States has cost lives by lack of preparedness and then a refusal to recognize reality and listen to science. We should respect science. And I so appreciate your giving me this opportunity to talk about what we need to do, some of the steps we need to take, and to really express again my support for your candidacy. I am so passionate about your winning this election. I think it can make such a difference, and just being willing to step forward as a candidate. You know, often people fail to understand how much work is involved, how much courage it takes to put yourself on the line. But our democracy really depends on good people willing to step forward. And so I want to thank you for the way you're conducting your campaign, which is at a very high level. And hopefully we'll see in the future more bipartisanship on many of these issues, because they should be, and they should be bipartisan. So thanks for all your newsletters. Thanks for having me. I look forward to coming up and being with you personally. And thanks to everybody who is listening.
Thank you so much for your time today. And you're right, more bipartisanship. That was how our country was set up to have, you know, initially they didn't want the two-party system, but it certainly helps keep both of us in check. And the more we have that, I think the better it is for America, and the better it is for Connecticut. So thank you so much. Truly appreciate your time today, and we hope to see you soon.
Good luck. Thank you.